Well, joining me now is the Foreign Affairs analyst Tim Marshall and Chris Phillips. He's a former head of the National Counter-Terrorism Security Service. Welcome to both of you. Tim Marshall, let's start with that. Is it your belief then that although Salah Abdeslam was captured, that the cell was still operating? He'd warned of further attacks, and in the end they've shown that the capability was still there.
Very much so, but not only that. The foreign minister and I believe Abdesalam's lawyer said he is cooperating. Now, what does that tell the people that are in hiding? He's telling more about us. The moment that the foreign minister said we've uncovered a new cell, they knew they had to move. Now, if you are doing that deliberately to stampede them because you're watching them and then you take them when they move, that's one thing. But if you've just stampeded them and accelerated their operation, that's another. Second point, the Belgian intelligence service, very brave people doing a very hard job, but they're not the A-team. And the last bit is that they are also so removed from the communities in which they need to be working within, and they're not there.
Right, it does seem incredible that even Salah Abdeslam was captured 4 months after a massive manhunt, and he was up the road.
2 miles up the road, with a beard, but so what? He was popping out, apparently, because the local guys in the takeaways knew him, and 2 miles away from Molenbeek, where they knew he was from, and for 4 months he lived like that. As I said, they haven't got the connections into the communities that they need to. I think they are years behind. They're blind and deaf and behind. So how do you catch up with someone if you're blind and deaf? They really are playing catch up, and it's extraordinarily difficult for them.
Right, so as the Prime Minister has said, what he feared has happened. In a way, it was always going to happen then, in that sense, if they didn't have any idea really what was going on their doorstep in an area that we've already spoken about, is a hotbed for jihadists, as it turns out. But it is also a sign that the bombers are showing that they can still terrorise a city like Brussels, which is now in lockdown.
Yeah, you can't get in or out by train or plane. You can't move around inside it. And what the bombers have done is hit targets very deliberately. If it's true that it was the American Airways check-in, which is also next to the Starbucks at the airport, then you've hit the symbols of the United States, which they are after.
Well, those are the reports,
yes,
aren't they?
And that tube station, the metro station that was hit, is not just random. That is because it is right next to the European Union headquarters, and so it is a blow against European unity. This symbolic stuff matters. The French get that. Tonight the Eiffel Tower will be lit in the colours of the Belgian flag as a sign of unity, because these bombs are designed to break unity.
Right, and they said, François Hollande, I think, has already said this is an attack on Europe, not just on Belgium. But the hallmarks of an attack like this targeting the transport system, which obviously we've seen, and as a reminder of 7/7 and the Madrid bombings, but different to the Paris attacks in that sense.
I would defer to someone who knows more about that sort of thing, but they know their tradecraft. There's a report that came out a couple of days ago, which the intelligence services are very interested in here, that came out of the United States, and it looked at the tradecraft of the Paris attacks. These people are properly trained in how they do it. For example, you buy a phone in the morning, you buy a SIM card separately, you make one phone call, you throw it away. I mean, that takes knowledge and training, and they are ahead of the game.
Right, just before I come to you then about particularly the start of the attacks, but also about the security services, because Tim Marshall is saying they're just not really quite up to the job that is facing them at the moment. We can also report that there is one British person injured, at the moment no fatalities. So first of all, on the transport network, I mean, that of course causes maximum mayhem.
Yes, it does, and we've seen the transport networks across the world being attacked time and time again, and the aviation sector is consistently being targeted. What we have here is something that we've seen before, actually. We've seen in Moscow, where the Moscow airport was actually blown up by someone being able to walk into that terminal with a suitcase bomb. So this is not new. I'm a bit disappointed, actually, that we've not really learnt some of our lessons. We know for a fact that if you want to secure a building, as an example, you put the security on the outside of that building. You don't put the security in the middle of it, because it's too late by the time they've got to that point.
And one of the things that struck me is that the explosions were in the departure lounge. I mean, that again seems to indicate a complete breach of security within the building, not just on the outer. Is that?
Well, it's not really a breach. We allow people to walk into airports with suitcases. That's what we do. Some airports around the world, such as Istanbul and India, where they perceive the threat is slightly different, will actually do a security search regime on the external parts. So you can only go into the terminal if you have your ticket and then your bags are searched. Maybe we've got to move towards that in the West.
Do you think we should?
Well, I wouldn't like to pronounce on it, but what that does do, and I think we saw it shortly after the plot for the liquid bombs that were going to go onto the Heathrow, for a few days. If you're in single file and backed up around, then there may still be an attack, but you haven't got that density of casualty that you have inside the airport terminal, which is what I think Chris is referring to. So that is one of the things that is going to be looked at by people all over the world, including in this country. Are we going to change the way that you check in? And it's quite possible we will.
David Laws, your thoughts on what's been going on today?
Well, horrendous. A reminder of how well we've done so far in this country and how well our security services have done in ensuring that these types of incidents haven't happened so far. But we clearly can't be complacent about that. The number of targets that potentially you have to protect against in an environment where people are prepared to take their own lives makes this job very, very difficult. And we can't be sure, even with the perhaps better level of skill and wisdom that we have in this country, that we won't at some stage have this type of offence committed on mainland UK.
We'll talk later on about the balance between security and liberty, but Boris Johnson, the Mayor of London, has already said that police presence is going to be increased, unsurprisingly, in London. Would you like other specific things to be done immediately to try and keep people safe at British airports and train stations?
Well, the people who are the real experts in MI5, MI6, the police, will give that advice and judgment to the government, and obviously the government will act sensibly. What we know is that this risk, was there a year ago, was there a month ago, will be there in a year's time. So we shouldn't overreact to individual incidents. We know actually that this is a permanent risk that we're going to have to live with for many years, and actually we ought to be thinking forward even when incidents like this aren't taking place.
Let's talk about the security services. They're not the A team, says Tim Marshall. Do you agree with that, the ones in Brussels?
Yeah, I've actually been over to Brussels and spoken to police officers over there, and they actually did feel quite hindered by government and actually what they were allowed to do.
It's very complicated there, isn't it?
Lots of police forces. They've got very difficult communities, actually, and some of these communities got 75% are of Muslim origin. So it is quite difficult for them to penetrate in and get the intelligence that they need. Clearly, if Abdus was able to stay on the run for 4 months, that's quite incredible. I'd be very disappointed if that happened in the UK.
Right, but you do agree that they're just not really doing enough, the security services, and they are leaving their country exposed.
I think there's obviously a problem there. They obviously need to learn a few lessons. I mean, we're good at terrorism in the UK because we've got so much experience. Now, experience is something that, you can't just get overnight. They will learn some lessons from this. There is an issue with people being able to move around the continent very easily. That is clearly a problem and something that the whole of Europe needs to look at.
Right, well, I think we can actually hear Boris Johnson, the Mayor of London, giving his response, certainly while the security meeting has been going on. Let's listen to Boris Johnson.
It looks as though there may be one UK casualty, as I'm sure you're aware, though the details on that are very, very sketchy at the moment. The most important thing to get across is that we know of no reason to think that there is any read across from what's happened in Brussels to events here in this city. We have no intelligence to suggest there is any immediate threat, but as a precaution and for the purposes of reassurance, there has been a stepping up of the presence of police at major airports.
Boris Johnson, then, I'd just like to clarify that the casualty is an injured person, not a fatality, and that's certainly the latest reports that we've been hearing at the moment. Of course, what people will ask is, where do we go from here? No one wants to predict that there will be another attack, but all of the capital cities in Europe must be even more worried than they were before.
Yeah, I mean, Mr. Mayor has just not raised the alert, but raised the profile of being aware. He knows that after a couple of days that will diminish. I mean, I do think that is for public consumption. he went to great pains to say there is no intelligence to suggest that there's anything.
No,
here,
it's a reaction to
yes.
what's happening in Brussels, not that they've received a...
So the UK is not necessarily under any more threat than it was yesterday or will be tomorrow, and that is just for a couple of days. People feel better, and you'll see a few extra police, and then we'll go back. And this is happening all across Europe. Where it will play in, and this is more in the realm of politics, where it will play in is to the debate about the communications bill and the intelligence bill,
And we'll talk
and
about
how much
that.
phone traffic you can monitor, because that was key to the Paris attacks, the phone traffic, and so that will play into the debate there, and also I think play into the political debate about security in this country. And I don't really want to go there, but it will even play into the EU referendum debate, but it shouldn't necessarily do
Don't go
that.
there, just for the moment. But Chris Phillips, thank you very much. I think you're coming back a little later on in the programme, Tim. Now, before the end of the show, let's return to Brussels and the terror attacks there today. Downing Street has just confirmed that one British national is known to have been injured in the bomb attack on the airport in Brussels, and the Foreign Affairs analyst Tim Marshall has joined us again. When we were talking earlier, we were discussing the response here, and as you said, it is going to have an impact on the Investigatory Powers Bill, and to some extent it could even influence the EU referendum. But for politicians it will be just about security and tightening that security. Do you think now they will feel in a position that they can extend security further than perhaps would have been palatable even just a few months ago?
No, because it didn't happen here. If it happened here, then I think they would. That would be a push. The Investigatory Powers Bill is pretty tight as it is. I mean, they've pushed it quite a long way already, and I did not detect in the discussion that you had with the various MPs any real need to push it much further. I think it's going to go through, and the civil liberties people think it's already gone too far. So I think it's going to go through anyway, and I don't think this particular event is going to change that.
What about the terrorism cells that we were talking about at the beginning of the programme? I mean, clearly their capability is still very much there. How do you tackle that? How do you deal with that? Or is this just going to be the way we're going to have to live our lives for the forthcoming future?
Well, both. This is the way we're going to have to live our lives, and we have been doing for several years, and we will be doing for many, many years to come. When David Cameron said it was a generational struggle, that's what he meant. I think Tony Blair said it even before Mr. Cameron said it when he was in power. So we are going to get used to it, but how to deal with it is twofold. I'll give you a small example. The UK police at the moment are appealing to any Brits that were caught up in either of the two explosions. Can they please send us, the British police, the footage? Now, why are they doing that? They're doing it for two reasons. One, they'll go through all the footage, see if they see anything interesting, and they'll send it to their Belgian counterparts. And they will also be looking at that footage to see if there's anyone that they recognise in that, because this is a pan-national operation that they're up against. The reason I mentioned that was because the way to combat it is through unity and through cooperation. I think the Belgians are behind the game. They need to get more ahead of the game. But I always come back to this. I mean, a bit of broken record, or for younger viewers, digital music on a loop.
Whatever the analogy is, yes.
Unless you defeat the ideology, you will simply get ISIS 2, ISIS 3.
Right. Do you agree with that? That actually, however much security there's, however good the surveillance is in all these countries, you're never going to be able to stop it unless you can deal with the ideology.
Yeah, you've got to go to the root of all this, the ideology, and you've also got to do what has been said, which is not react just to individual incidents, whether in the UK or abroad, but understand that this risk is going to be there for many years and maintain as high a level of security as possible continuously, rather than reacting to events when it's too late.
What about the weaponry? Because I understand it was assault rifles that were used in the Paris attacks, and reports that they were bought online.
Yes.
How does that happen?
Very easily. The Czech Republic has got an awful lot of spare AK-47 Kalashnikovs and Kalashnikov knockoffs, and you can get them for as little as £200.
I mean, surely that's being dealt with.
Well, there's the dark web, and then there's all sorts of webs that the intelligence services are trying to get into. Well, on my phone, I have an app that, if I chose to, I can talk to somebody else on it, and it scrambles it. And as far as I know, this app that I have, which anyone can get, the intelligence services cannot actually break it yet. Now, you can make an argument about civil liberties about whether they should be able to break it or not, but the fact is that they can't. So it's quite easy to talk to one another with a scrambled app and make all sorts of things. Also, this is why the border issue will come back into the equation. These people have been travelling around the Schengen zone,
and isn't that the end of the Schengen zone, certainly for the foreseeable future, not just because of attacks today, but also the migrant crisis, that it's lent itself to this feeling of fear of too many people travelling round a very big area?
It's going to raise some of those countries, but quite clearly, when you don't have the benefit that we do of the English Channel, it is much more difficult to control flows. One of the things we've done in our country in the last government is to restore entry and exit checks, which will make it easier to monitor people going.
Well, let's just have a look. These are some of the pictures, the dreadful pictures. I mean, just look at the damage and devastation there at the airport. And if you remember, there were 2 explosions at the airport, a smaller one to start with, and then, rather tragically, people ran, I think, into the direction of the larger explosion, which we understand to be the suicide bomber. There are people cowering there. I'm afraid these are the scenes we will leave you with today on The Daily Politics, the mayhem in Brussels. That's it for today. Thank you very much to all of our guests. Obviously, thank you very much to you, Tim Marshall, and we'll have developments on this throughout the day. Thank you to you, David Laws, too, for being here today. The 1 o'clock news